So for about the last year and a half, I have been living in Qtile as far as my window manager. Qtile is a tiling window manager written and configured entirely in Python, and it's fantastic. It's basically a Xmonad clone itself. Xmonad's written and configured in Haskell. Qtile is written and configured in Python. Most people are probably going to find Python a lot easier to work with than Haskell. And my Qtile config really hasn't changed much in about 2 years. When I last played with the config and tried to rise the theme a little bit, I adjusted some of the widgets in the panel, some of the colors, but essentially I have been staring at the same Qtile desktop for almost 2 years now, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to play with the config. I wanted to theme it in a slightly different way today. Mainly, I just wanted a fresh, maybe more modern look to this desktop. So the first thing that I'm thinking about doing is, instead of using a traditional panel that takes 100% width of the screen and is buttressed up right against the side of the screen, the edge of the screen, with no margin, no padding, I'm thinking about making this panel a floating panel. So let's get it away from the edge of the screen. Let's add a little margin to both sides. And of course, if you're going to float the panel, it really should have a corner radius, right? It should have rounded corners on it. So think of the floating panel in KDE Plasma, for example. It has a floating panel, or a floating dock in a desktop environment like GNOME. That's what I'm thinking about doing with this panel. So the first thing I need to do is to get rounded corners for the panel and also all the windows. What I need to go do is I need to edit my PyCom config. PyCom is the compositor that basically is responsible for the borders and the shadowing effects and all of that here on Qtile. So let me go ahead and get into Emacs, and I'm going to navigate into .config/PyCom, pycom.conf. So this is my PyCom config. Let me zoom way in here, and I'm going to search for corner radius. There it is. I've got this commented out because I typically don't do a rounded corner on windows and panels, but for purposes of this video, because I wanted to switch it up a little bit, let's turn on the corner radius effect. Now, while I've got the window focused here, the border of the window kind of hides the fact that this is now a rounded window. Let me get the mouse off the window. I'll focus on a different monitor, and you can see we've added just a little bit of roundedness to the window, as well as the panel at the top, although it doesn't look quite right because the panel at the top, of course, is still right up against the edge of the screen. But let's go ahead and take care of that next. So let's go ahead and get into our Qtile config. So your Qtile config is typically going to be found in your home directory /.config/qtile/config.py. This is your actual Qtile config. It's a Python script, right? Now, in my case, because I'm using Emacs and I'm using a literate config, I have a Qtile config called readme.org. And basically, there are source code blocks in this literate config. The source code blocks, they get outputted to the config.py later. But this is neat because the comments are part of a README that's going to go to my GitLab, and then the source code blocks will, of course, get written to the proper Qtile config, config.py. So it just saves me a little bit of work by combining the README elements of the document as well as the actual source code into one document. Now, let me zoom in here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make the panel float. So I need to go and adjust the settings in the bar. So in the table of contents here in this org document, I've got screens. Inside screens, I should have something with some bars. There it is, top equals bar dot bar. So these are the 3 bars on each of my 3 monitors. So in the 3 bars here, you can see I've got each of them set to a height of 26. That's what size is. There is a setting you can use for margin as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add margin to all 3 of these bars. So let me go ahead and add margin equals, and let's say 20, and let me put a space in front of that just to make it a little more readable. Let me go ahead and write to my readme.org, and let me go ahead and org babel tangle over the source code blocks to my config.py. And now if I do a Control-Shift-R to restart Qtile here, you can see I just added a margin of 20 all around the panel. That's kind of cool. Now that's a lot of margin, and I don't want margin of 20 in every direction. Matter of fact, I don't know if I want margin of 20 in any direction, but what I could do is in the Qtile documentation, it does say that you can give margin 4 different values for north, east, south, west. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So let me get back into visual mode here, and let's change these to inside not parentheses, it needs to be inside brackets here in Python. We're going to create this little list here. I'm going to do a margin of 8 on the north and south coordinates, and I think a margin of 12 on the east-west coordinates. So let's go ahead and add those. And now, if I zoom out, you can see that's the way that is going to look. Let me write that, and let me org babel tangle that, and once again we'll restart Qtile. Yeah, and I think that's much more appropriate padding now. Now some other things that I want to play with a little bit is the layouts here in my config. If I go to layouts, I have a million different layouts commented out. I've got a lot of different settings, and you know what, I've kind of gotten tired of using some of these very highly customized layouts that I don't really need, like this tiled layout here, what I was using with some weird settings, weird ratios. If you've ever used my config, you were probably wondering what I was doing with some of the weird ratios in that tiling layout. That was for certain scenes when I was recording in OBS, but I don't really use it much, so I'm just going to get rid of that. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of my customizations to the tiling layout and just use a regular tile layout. I'm going to keep the monad tall layout as well, and that's just going to be your plain Jane monad tall layout. And then a max layout. Now the max layout is going to be interesting because now that I'm doing a floating panel, having a max layout, which should be a window with no borders, no padding, no margin, and it should be up against the panel, that's going to look weird with a floating panel. So probably I'm going to have to get rid of that max layout, or it's going to have to be, I don't know. We'll come back to it later. I may or may not get to that on this video, but I know I wanted to change those back to their default settings, and I may enable some of the other more interesting layouts. For example, monad wide. I may go ahead and just enable that. Matter of fact, I'm just going to stick with these 4 layouts. These are, I think, the ones I would use the most. So I've got monad tall, monad wide, tiling, and max. I'm going to go ahead and write that. And if you're wondering what the ** layout _ theme is, so these are config settings that I want to use kind of globally. So I have this here, layout theme equals these settings. So anytime I want a theme to always have these settings, you know, I can just throw that inside those parentheses there. So that just saves me a lot of extra typing, because I would do border width 2, for example, in every layout essentially. So it just saves me from having to always type all of this. Now, next up, you know, I think to change the look, to give it a little bit of a different look, I've always liked just having workspace numbers as like the workspace label. But of course, I don't have to do that. I could give it actual words. I could give it Unicode symbols. That wasn't what I wanted to go to. I wanted to go to groups here. So under groups, we have group labels. And you can see I'm using group labels equals 1 through 9. That's the names here of the workspaces. But if I wanted to, you know, I could comment this out and go to these little words here, right? So, you know, dev, www, sys, doc, yada, 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 right? I could have those as labels. Let me write that. Let me do the tangle, and then let me restart, you know, and I could do the words. Matter of fact, I used to use this a lot back in the early days of the channel. I'm sure you guys remember this, and I do like the look of this. I think this is much better on the eyes than staring at, you know, 1 through 9. But another cool thing I could do, and this is what I'm thinking of doing, let me go ahead and comment that out, is just going to the symbols here. So these are just Unicode characters, right? Unicode symbols, and having those be the name. So let's go ahead and babble that. And, you know, that looks okay other than the Unicode symbols. are very tiny. So we're going to have to adjust the size if we're going to use those. So let's go ahead and adjust the size. So let me go into widgets. And this is the group box here. So let's find the widget that is widget.groupbox. And let's add some margin because we need a lot more margin than what we have, I think. So let's add margin X instead of 5. Let's do it 15. And let me go ahead and write that and org babel tangle and restart. Yeah, I like the extra padding, but still the characters themselves are too small. Let's change the font size, which right now is 11. Let's make it 13. Let's up it just a little bit. And once again, restart. And yeah, I'm liking the look of that already, but let's make it a little bigger. Let's make the font size 15. And once again, restart. Yeah, now I think that's what I want to go with right there. No, I don't know. I think that might be a little bit too much margin. Let's split the difference. So 5 was too little, 15's too much. Let's do a margin X of 10. Let's go ahead and do a restart. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good there. Now, there are a couple of visual things that I've never quite liked having on the bar. I kept a lot of this stuff on the bar for documentation purposes. I know a lot of people use my config. For example, on the layouts here, you know, a lot of people like having the ability to have an icon that shows me exactly what layout I'm in. Now, I have the word, for example, monad tall is the layout, but you get a little icon there, right? Or I switch to monad wide and you see the icon changes, and that is kind of neat if you didn't know what the monad tall or monad wide layout looked like, but I don't really need that icon. I think it's out of place. So let me go ahead and get rid of the icon. So let's go down to the next widget on the panel, which is current layout icon. And for me, let's just delete that section. Let me write that. And let me restart. Every time I make a small change, I'm gonna restart just to make sure that I'm not missing any punctuation in the config, just to make sure that the config is not broken. And I can already see that I've got a warning here about the systray widget crashing, and that's because I've got 3 different panels and the systray is trying to run on all 3 panels. I'm gonna fix that later, but this is an easy fix we'll get to in a bit. One thing I don't like is the very first image here, this little icon here, which if you click on it just opens the terminal. And I was using this image that, you know, I created using some logo making tool on the internet, but you know, I might change the image, but I also want to add some spacing around the image because it made sense to have the image there when the panel was not a floating panel and it was right up against the edge of the screen, but now it actually needs a little bit of margin. So what there is this widget.spacer. I'm going to copy that, and right before widget.image here, which is that image right there, let's add a spacer. And let's see if length equals 8. Let's see if that's enough of a spacer there. You know what? Let's make it a little bigger. And now, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I'm good with that. Another thing I've been wanting to do is I've wanted to make this config a little simpler as far as my life and some of the dependencies. So right now, my Qtile config does use some of the Qtile extras libraries. That's how I get underlines here on some of the widgets in the panel, because by default, Qtile's bar does not support that, but there is a Qtile extras package that does give you some libraries that can give you those fancy decorations, but I don't really need those decorations. And again, it would make my life a little easier without having to constantly make sure that both Qtile and Qtile extras are up to date and on compatible versions. So I'm going to get rid of all the underline decorations on these widgets. So I'm just going to go in here, and everywhere where I have decorations equals, you know, that's part of the Qtile extras library. So let's just get rid of that. And that one right there, let's get rid of that one as well. Make sure I space that correctly. Let's get rid of that one. Let's get rid of that one. Get rid of that one. Let's get rid of that one. And let's get rid of that one. Let me write. And let me restart just to make sure that I didn't make any mistakes as far as any punctuation, because I was, deleting a lot of stuff there. Looks like it reloaded just fine. No more underlines. I'm going to add some spacing around this because they're a little bunched up. The underlines made it really easy to tell which widget was which, but now that they're no longer underlined, yeah, I'm going to add a little bit more spacing there. But the first thing I need to do, now that I got rid of the Qtile extras decoration code in the widget portion of this, let's go into imports at the top here. And now I no longer need Qtile extras. Just get rid of that. I could also go ahead and remove Qtile extras from my system. I could do a sudo pacman -R, for remove a package, Qtile extras, because I just don't need it anymore. Not gonna ever need that line. I'm gonna just get rid of all of that. Let me make sure all of this works once again. Yeah, so now my config is free of Qtile extras. One thing I've never quite liked is the Unicode symbols that I've chosen for the widgets over here. The one I chose for CPU is really tall and kind of out of place compared to the size of the other symbols here. So I'm going to change the CPU widget there. So let me go back into widgets. Let's scroll down to widget.cpu. There it is, widget.cpu. And I went on the internet and just did a quick Google search for Unicode symbols, and I just grabbed one that, hey, let's go with the lightning strike. Let's see how this looks. I may not keep this one either, but let's just see if it's a much better size. Yeah, it's much more appropriately sized. So I'm probably going to go with that instead. It does have a lot of space around it, so let's delete one of the spaces here. And yeah, I think, yeah, I'm not crazy about that symbol either, but I'm going to leave it for now. It's definitely better than the one I was using. And actually, now that I'm going down this rabbit hole of evaluating some of the Unicode symbols, I don't like a lot of the symbols that I'm using for the groups. Some of them are nice. I like the folder, I like the globe, I like the box, but some of the others, let's go back into groups. I'm going to swap out some of these. Like, I don't like the eyedropper. It doesn't really make sense for anything I do on my system. The beaker as well. Let's change some of this out. All right, so I changed the symbols out to some different things. I tried to align them so that if I ever switch from the Unicode characters here to like the words like dev, I got a little pound symbol there, www, I've got a globe here. It's kind of like almost like the Chrome logo. Sys, I've got a little settings wheel. I've got a folder for doc, VBox. I've actually got a box, right? Chat, and is that the Telegram icon? I've never used Telegram, but music, I've got, that's a microphone. It really should have been a speaker or something. Video, I've got a video camera. Graphics, I've got a picture, and then I've added a 10th one because I was only using 9 workspaces, but you've got 1 through 0 on the keyboard, so it made sense to add a 10th workspace. I should add a 10th workspace to all of these, not just for the Unicode characters. How about on this one, we'll make the last one miscellaneous, and on this one, it would just be 0. And then, of course, we need to make sure the group names. So this is for your key bindings. It's very important to also add a 0 right there. And let's actually restart that just to make sure all of that is good. And all of that is not good because the restart did not do anything, you guys. I hit the key binding, but nothing flickered or anything. So there is something it did not like here. I wonder if it didn't like me adding that 10th workspace there. Yep, that was it. So it doesn't like me adding the 10th workspace. That is weird. I wonder why not. Let me go check the code here. Is there anything that is limiting it to just 1 through 9? I don't see anything in specific, but you know what? 9 workspaces is enough. So let's just get rid of that workspace. I've never felt like 9 workspaces was too few anyway. So yeah, and as far as the icons, the Unicode characters here, yeah, all of that looks good. Now the microphone looks a little big here, doesn't it? So I'm not crazy about that either. So you know what? Let's swap that out. I was thinking about using that one anyway. So let's get rid of that. And now, yeah, I think this group of symbols is quite a bit better actually. One other thing I want to do is the workspaces that are inactive or there's nothing on them. I would like to make their icon color a little bit darker, almost barely visible, because I think that would stand out. That would be a very good contrast. It would be obvious, hey, nothing's on that workspace. So let's go back into the widgets. So let's go back to the group box widget, and the active color is 8. The inactive color is 1. And if I split the screen here, and I've got this custom library here called colors.py. So these are like 8 or 10 different color schemes that I can quickly switch to here in my Qtile config. So my Qtile config sources this file. And at the very end of all these color schemes, I've added the same kind of dark gray color. It's not real dark, but it's kind of on the darker side. So I've got color 9 here is what that would be. So let me go ahead and close that split. So let's make the inactive color color 9. And now you see how now this very obvious that nothing is going on those workspaces. I like that a lot. I also think I would prefer the spacers here, the little pipe symbols that are separating some of the widgets, to be that same color, color 9, because right now they're a little bit too white, right? They stand out a little bit. So let me go find those pipe symbols here, this widget.text box. And what is the text? It's the pipe symbol, and it's colored for color 1. Let's change that to color 9. And the same thing with this one as well. Let's go ahead and change that to color 9. And now, restart. Yeah, I'm liking where we're going with this. One thing I noticed is the padding around the second pipe is a little off as far as the spacing between the window name. So let's go, we probably need to add a spacer. I bet that's the only thing I really need to do. Or I could probably just add margin if there is a padding setting. Yeah, so let's add a little bit of padding to this. Oh, wrong key. There we go. And see if adding a little padding did help, actually. Let's make it 4 instead of 2. And yeah, you can see now there's equal amounts of padding on both sides of that. And now let's play with the spacing here on the widgets at the top here. So for these, I've got spacers in between each section. And it made sense to do the spacers when I was doing the underlying decorations. I had to use spacers, but I bet now I could use padding. So what if I added padding equals 4, for example? And then we just get rid of some of the spacers here. And let's see if that actually works. The systray widget crashed, but I'm just checking the spacing here around that was the CPU widget. Let's see if I go 8 for the padding. Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. Remove the spacers and add padding to each of these. So very quickly off camera, I went ahead and added padding equals 6 to each of the widgets here. So there's a 6 padding on each side of the widget that spaces them out quite nicely. Not too much space, but not too little space either. It's very easy to distinguish between each of the widgets. One last thing I wanted to do, I went and grabbed a new image here to use. So instead of using the little kind of like a bird image here, I created a little infinity icon here. And now, nicely colored there. Let's go to an empty workspace and let's actually see how our new bar looks, because I think that's the way it's going to end up. I'll fix the little systray error here in a minute as well. But for me, I think that is a nice, fresh, new look, a little bit more modern look, right? I do think now that it's floating, we could actually make the panel a little taller. And let's go back into screens. Let's go to the bars and the size here. Let's go ahead and change all of that to size 28. Let's just make it slightly taller. And now, yeah, for me, I think that's good. The systray widget that keeps crashing, let's go fix that. So what this is, I'm using 3 monitors. I have a bar that's using a init widgets screen 1, and then I have 2 that are both using init widgets screen 2. So what this is these 2 bars have a certain group of widgets that get outputted, into the bar. But this one bar, that's the one that gets everything, all the widgets, including the sys tray. These 2 don't get the sys tray. But I need to specify exactly which widgets don't make it into widgets screen 2. And it looks like I was using this group here, 22 to 24, but the problem is now that I deleted a lot of widgets, I deleted several widgets, including a bunch of spacer widgets. I probably deleted 7 or 8 different widgets. So that number is off. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to go to the top of the widgets here and count the number of widgets here until I get down to the sys tray, and then make the sys tray the correct number. All right, if I counted, there were 17 widgets in the widget list. So I think if I did 16 and 17, let's see if that fixed it. It must not have fixed it because I still had the sys tray crash there. Let me make sure, yeah. So I'm definitely wrong on that. Why not just do 16? It's not 16. I must have miscounted. Let's make sure. 17. And now, yeah, 17 is not even there, so I must have miscounted. So I bet it's 15. I tried to be careful counting, but it's 15. Okay, now the error goes away. So we get rid of widget 15 and 16, which is the spacer that went behind it. Yeah. And now everything is perfect. I'm good with this. What I'm going to do is I am going to take this new config. Of course, I'm going to put that on my GitLab. Let's go ahead and push it to my GitLab now. Let me do a config status to see what has changed. So a couple of different things have changed. But let me go ahead and add that. Let's add a commit message. I'm going to say new floating panel Qtile. And then finally push that to my GitLab. So for those of you that want my new Qtile config, go over to my GitLab. That is gitlab.com/dwt1. And when you go to my GitLab, just look for the .files repository. I've got a bunch of different projects over on GitLab, several, a couple of dozen at least. But go into .files, and that's where you'll find .config/Qtile, and then config.py and colors.py, and you pretty much want all of this. Unless you're using Emacs, you don't need the readme.org. But again, this readme.org is my config. It's also the readme for this repo. So makes it really convenient, especially for documentation purposes, to actually use Emacs and literate org files as your config files. So there you have it. Just a little bit of what you can do playing around just for, I don't know, 30 minutes or so here with our Qtile config. I think what we ended up with is rather nice. Now, before I go, I need to thank a few special people. I need to thank the producers of this episode: Matt, Steve, Armor Dragon, Cap Caveman, Darloff, Dayless, George, Lee, Mythos, Aryan, Paul, Peace, Harshamador, Realities for Less, Red Prophet, Roland, War Gentoo, and Ubuntu, and Willie. These guys, they're my highest tiered patrons over on Patreon. Without these guys, this episode you just watched would not have been possible. The show is also brought to you by each and every one of these fine ladies and gentlemen. All these names you're seeing on the screen. These are my supporters over on Patreon. I depend on you guys to help support what I do. If you like my work, want to see more videos about Linux and free and open source software, subscribe to DistroTube over on Patreon. Peace, guys.